And we're just on slide number 38 now, and I'll hand it over to PJ.
Okay, well, thank you very much, and thank you, Brian, for that, because it leads in nicely out of the Canadian guideline work into what I'm going to be talking about with specific guidelines for the childcare and early learning setting. And I'm just going to quickly get into where it comes from. If you can change the slide, Bill. Bill already showed you that this is through the work that our CLASP coalition across Canada, CACO, and the Healthy Beginnings Project particularly. And in phase 2 of that grant cycle, it was really important that we broadened our reach and deepened our impact, and we'd been working in schools. And all the partners across Canada felt it was really important to move into early learning settings related to this. And so we were taking a look really along those Live 5210 type of thing, messaging for healthy living in childcare, which is physical activity, screen time, sugar-sweetened beverage, and vegetable and fruit consumption. Next slide. And we took a very holistic socio-ecological approach where children live, learn, and play. You can see it here, childcare being one of those places where they spend a lot of time, that also have a framework of with a health intermediary and governed by guidelines and best practices and standards. Next slide. So here you have just the piece, and why we thought it was so important is you'll see because of reciprocal determinism, or the fact that the child can affect what a child care provider does, the family affects what the child care center does, and vice versa. The child care center has a huge influence on what the child does and also on somewhat on the family. Next. So within the Healthy Beginnings for preschoolers, we took a look at how to approach this, and one of the key things beyond the content area was that we wanted to adopt what we'd seen in the school setting as that more comprehensive whole setting approach. So next. So Vanessa will talk more specifically about the whole initiative and the toolkit and training, but I'm going to focus on this is the whole setting model that we chose for the setting. So we're looking at family as a major component. We're looking at the physical environment, and we took a look at guidelines, or what guides the practice of the child care provider, and then actually putting practices in their hands so they can meet the guidelines. So my talk today is focusing on guidelines. And as Brian showed, we now have Canadian physical activity guidelines for the age group for both sedentary and physical activity, but these are full day guidelines. They aren't particularly targeted at the child care setting, where research we've done in BC shows a child there is 7.2 to 8 hours a day. Next. There you see the sedentary behavior guidelines that Brian alluded to as well, which really talk about how much screens, nothing below 2 years of age, and then limiting to 1 hour per day. But once again, that's a whole day guideline, and it doesn't really tell a child care provider what should be done in their setting. Next. So we went along taking this whole setting approach, looking at the guidance piece and what was available. So we decided to take, back in early October 2012, we decided to take a jurisdictional review, and we wanted to embed some of the current thinking on the development of physical literacy, fundamental movement skills as a foundation for play, can't catch, won't play. Quite a bit of evidence showing that manipulative skills are critically important later on in life, and that the skills were not being taught. So we wanted to focus on that a little bit more, definitely deal with screens, and then address some of the facilitation, because in the early learning settings there is a discussion about whether there should be facilitation in certain environments like the backyard or in the play area. So from that jurisdictional review, we drafted a set of what we're calling better practice guidelines. We consulted across our jurisdictions about that, and we recently piloted them within our toolkit. Next slide. So the first thing is we sent out, it's not published, the cross-province policy review. So Bill will be circulating it to you. But the key take-home message when we went looking, and Trish Tucker's group will show you an article by Vanderloo that confirms this, is really regulatory frameworks in this country do not provide specific guidance on physical activity, like how much and specifics around what and how to deliver for very, very many reasons. But it's really important for us to know that the regulatory framework is not going to guide physical activity practices very well. Typically, practice guidance was present in documents like early learning curriculums, early learning frameworks, or standard type of documents, or health promotion documents for the setting that the province has invested in, but aren't included as a standard and aren't in the review of what's going on. And generally also because in this project we went way beyond physical activity to look at not only screen time but the eating behaviors, we found that the guidance is actually weaker on physical activity than health eating. For instance, in my own province, there's actually a section in the regulatory framework that says it's called nutrition, and it does indicate they need to use the Canada's Food Guide. It's not as specific also as we would like, but I'm just saying that at least they had a section in the regulatory framework. So that's just an example of what I'm talking about. So in reality, well, across jurisdiction, there's very little guidance. Next, that's okay, Bill. So we drafted some based on what existed across Canada and internationally. This is the full day guidance. We also developed a half-day childcare guideline, and I'm going to just briefly show you where we came to these. First of all, children will accumulate at least 120 minutes of moderate to vigorous physical activity daily while in childcare. Ideally, some outdoor playtime will be included. Follow a children's natural rhythm in that we're not out there training them. It's play, 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 and more play. Snacking on physical activity. And we chose this based on, I'll show you in a second what that's based on, but some of it's practical. You've got 7 to 8 hours of childcare. You've got 180 minutes for the full day, so 2/3 of their waking hours are in care, and that's how we came to that number. At least 60 minutes of physical activity is led by the early learning practitioner. We're using the word led there because it's easily understood, but what we're talking about here is facilitation. And then we started to get more specific around at least 2 activities should target fundamental movement skills, and at least one of those will target throwing, catching, kicking, or batting an object. And this is because of some of our experience in research is that we've largely engineered the manipulative skills or object control skills out of childcare because of the risks, with bats and balls and kicking and kids getting hit. But we know from some of Barnett's work in Australia that the object control skills are very predictive of prolonged engagement in physical activity because people start to believe they're able to be physical in a number of settings, so their confidence goes up and their likelihood to engage. So it's really critical that we don't leave half the fundamental movement skills or 1/3 of the fundamental movement skills out of the play in this age group. We also talked about free play and unstructured play, which is very important to childcare providers, and then avoiding games where a child could be a target and using soft equipment where, as I like to say, no pain, no pain. Okay, next slide. So I'm just going to quickly refer you to this. You have this to look at later, but where does this come from? We used the CSEP guidance. We looked at NASB. We looked at Participation had named 120 minutes. You see that in Nova Scotia, they've chosen 90 minutes per day. Saskatchewan and Motion had basically the 130 minutes at home, 30 minutes in school, and 30 minutes in the community. So we took that as a subtle guidance around them. So we basically looked at what we could get around guidance in minutes and then looked practically how much of the child's day is actually spent in childcare. Next. Same thing, this is a bit of a fuzzy slide, I apologize. This is about targeting the fundamental movement skills and where we see some guidance. There are a lot of documents that said make sure you do large and small muscle skills, space for large and fine motor play, activities promote large muscle development, free play. So you see it's not very specific in regards to the fundamental movement skills. Next. Then we moved into reminding that outdoor play is critically important because we know that children that are playing outdoors, the more time they're outdoors, the higher their physical activity levels are. And then we did start to say, because there is some belief, depending on philosophy, the early learning practitioner, the ECE, or the child care provider is following, there is a movement to saying, you want to have that unstructured play and the opportunities because of all the social gains and not being monitored by the adults. We're now moving into, I believe Mark Trombley's group is doing a review on risky play and the importance of that. So not that we're trying to go away from the importance of unstructured play, but we do have evidence from Temple et al. in British Columbia that shows when adult facilitation is there, we see more physical activity and we see a broader range of movement skills being introduced. Now, let's talk about what facilitation is. Is this line them up and say, oh, yeah, we're doing a relay, kids? Or is it an example where our family child care provider brings out 6 tiny shovels, gets to the garden, and starts to dig? And then the kids look over, oh, what's she doing over there? So those are the types of things we're discussing when we're talking about leading. Maybe it's, throwing out the hula hoops and starting hula hooping yourself so the children know what to do with it, then starting to invent games, and then the next time, facilitation is only throwing out the hula hoops. Next. Then this is the free play unstructured, making sure people really feel comfortable that this is an important piece. Next. And then we went into the screen time guidelines, which were they should be exposed to 30 minutes or less of screen time daily while in childcare. This is taking into account, again, the fact that likely the parent will have screens in their environment and that we wanted to divide up, that the parent doesn't end up with a child that spends so much time in front of screens in the child care setting that there can be no recreational screen time to meet the overall guideline for the day. Once again, we just reiterated, do not expose children under 2 to any screen time, and that active video games don't replace the benefits of physical activity time. And then we added also in for the food and the physical activity, avoiding exposure to marketing and advertising. Next. So here you see again where we took our guidance from in that document. Next. Once again, you see it here where we're taking CSEP's guidance and then just dividing it up. You see the Alberta Coalition for Healthy School Communities, Feeding Tiny Tummies, that's around, speaks to screen time as well. So you start to see that a lot of these guidelines that we're taking evidence on weren't from regulatory frameworks or standards, but from more health promotion messaging from key stakeholders in Canada. Next. We did take a look. So those are the guidelines. We implemented them within our broader Healthy Beginnings initiative, and Vanessa's going to talk more about that. But here's some of the feedback about the guidelines themselves. It was an eye-opener. Pay more attention to the type of PA the kids are getting. Vigorous, moderate, hand-eye coordination, increased awareness. So suddenly with the guideline there, the conversation was broader with the child care provider. And I think we see a lot that the awareness of these new sedentary or screen time guidelines, people were very interested in that. And the final quote shows you that this is going to be a practice issue, that it is challenging to think about how do we integrate physical activity within the child care day. And this discussion is really how we integrate literacy, numeracy, physical activity together, rather than seeing them, okay, now we have our 2 hours of physical activity, or now we have our reading time, now we have our numeracy time, and much more facing how do we integrate these things into the daily business. Next. So in summary, we think that better practice guidelines are needed across Canada. We saw mostly soft guidance across Canada, but that if we're going to implement these types of policy or better practice guidelines or hopefully standards of practice, it's going to require quite a bit of buy-in from managers and practitioners, and that training and technical support is an essential component of change in practice. And with that, I segue over to Vanessa.
Great. Thank you, PJ. So hi, everybody. My name is Vanessa Morley, and I was the Healthy Beginnings